Even if the Chinese were able to capture Taiwan without firing a shot, it doesn't solve anything for them. They're still food importers. They're still dependent on the United States. They're still energy importers. And even if they take every single one of those semiconductor fab facilities intact, they don't know how to operate them because they can't operate their own. And their own are among the worst in the world, not the best.
Whew.
Now, the only reason, in my opinion, to be concerned about a Taiwan war is because Xi has so isolated himself that when one person is making all the decisions and that one person refuses to access information to make the decisions, strange stuff happens.
And when you say refuses to access, what do you mean by that?
He does not have normal information flows anymore. Like even at the height of the Trump administration, when Trump was basically isolated himself from the entire intelligence community, he was still getting the daily briefing. There was still information being put in front of him. But Xi is so isolated himself. He doesn't want to hear anything except for what he wants to hear. And since no one knows what the status of the conversation with the voices in his head in on any given day, no one wants to bring him anything unless they're ordered to.
How do we know this about him?
Because there's no one to listen to anymore. That's one of the fun things about Russia versus China right now is that the Russian information security is so poor that American intelligence is literally listening in on everything. But in China, we can hear into the office, but there are no conversations happening.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? Like, so no one talks to him about anything?
Anything. If you look at
So he's just terrifying to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he murders dissidents. He murders anybody that...
He doesn't murder everyone, but there's a lot of people in prison.
And there's also a lot of billionaires that got disappeared, right? And any dissent.
Yeah, you're either executed or exiled, intimidated into silence. There's a variety of options. And if you look at the third-party Congress that we had late last year, that's when they select the Politburo. Everyone on the Politburo now is a personal flunky. There is no one from a different faction. There is no one that has a history of being incompetent.
Whew. And what is their plan?
The Chinese?
Yeah, do we have any idea of what their plan to get out of this is?
Nationalism. If you know that the economic situation is going to go to pot, then you have a couple of options. Option one is you try to cut a deal with a country that can help you out, but the only country that could do that is the United States. And the sort of strategic surrender that the Americans would require is not something that the Chinese would accept. So think about Germany in 1946. That's the scale of support and control that the Americans would insist upon for giving the Chinese a lease on life. But if you go with nationalism, give people a non-economic reason to support the state. So even if you lose your job, even if you can't feed your family, I'm Chinese, I'm Han, that's enough. That has been the strategy for the last couple of years. Will it be enough to preserve the CCP? Too soon to know.
And they're also they're in the middle of the worst aspect of the pandemic for them ever.
Yeah. Now,
which is very strange for us because we're on the other end of it, right? So what happened over there?
Well, let me start by saying I think it's safe to say that no country has really figured out how to handle this well.
Right.
Second, I will say there are 7 different variants circulating in Beijing right now, or in China right now. 3 of them did not exist 2 or 3 months ago. And it takes about 6 months of data for you to get good information on the R0 and the lethality. So we just don't know. And then third, in part because of Xi, when you're a one-man state, all policy and all authority starts and stops with you. And unless you're providing very clear guidance on everything, which is impossible for one person to do for a whole country, especially one the size of China, the bureaucracy either goes into automatic or does nothing. Well, right now it's doing nothing. So the data decisions in China are not to gather data and figure out what we can do. It's to, instead of gathering data and lying about it, we're just not going to gather any data at all. So we're not going to know how bad these strains are until they get out of China and circulate in the rest of the world for 6 months. So the lowest fatality estimate that I have seen that I consider credible is that they're going to lose 1.5 million people.
Just from COVID?
Just from COVID. That assumes no broader breakdown in the health system, which we are already seeing.
And is this because they don't have natural immunity because
That's
of
part of it.
The rigid lockdowns that they encountered?
Yeah. From a plus point of view, they did keep the virus out of the population for almost 3 years. So no one has natural immunity. But we also know that their domestically generated vaccines aren't great. And most of the countries that used them in order to get their kind of first batch then moved on to a Western model that worked better.
So they had a twofold problem. They did not have vaccines, and they didn't develop natural immunity.
And now everyone's getting hit all at once with a virus that has at least 50% more communicability than the measles.
And their overall health
is worse than ours. Diabetes as a percentage of the population is higher. They don't have a critical care system like we have. And their hospitals are really their only line of defense. They don't have a clinic and a doctor system in the towns like we do.
And what about nutrition education and the understanding of...
Yeah, it's... when you industrialize very, very quickly, especially in a culture like China where food is considered a sign of wealth, getting fat is the thing to do. So we've got a lot of diabetes, a lot of hypertension, a lot of overweight people, and over 2/3 of the population lives in a metro region and their air quality sucks too. So we're kind of seeing like the worst aspects of the Indian system and the American system all in one.
So obviously the United States government is aware of all these things, correct?
Well, let's not oversell it, but broadly.
Broadly.
Yeah.
Have you been brought in to talk to people? Because you have a very comprehensive view of this that includes energy and nitrogen, fertilizers, everything. Like, has anybody ever brought you in and said, Peter, can you give us an assessment of what we're really dealing with versus what each individual expert has to contribute to it? Because you're giving an overall sort of comprehensive view of this.
I'm happy to say that I am doing some work with the Defense Department. I can't talk about the details, obviously, but I think it's good to give credit where it's due. One of the many, many things about the war on terror that reshaped the U.S. government is that we focus all of our intelligence apparatus on supporting the troops, which is reasonable. So instead of thinking, it's 2045 and you're thinking over the horizon, who's our foe going to be and what kind of tank are they going to use so that we can start preparing, which is what we used to do. It instead became there's someone on the other side of this door and the third floor of this building at the edge of town in Fallujah. What side of the door the hinges are, because we need to know if we need to blow it off the hinges or kick it in. So we focused all on that second thing for 20 years, which meant not only did we lose all the analysts who knew how to think forward, we lost all the people who trained them. 20 years is a long time. So even if everyone in DoD or the intelligence community disagrees with everything I have to say, and I have some friends, I have some colleagues, I have some non-friends who listen. The fact that they're trying to rebuild that capacity is a really good sign. And the fact that they started rebuilding that capacity so soon after the war on terror ended means that they recognize the hole in the system.